Great. Thanks, Guthrie. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Sarah Lechner with Coragio Group. And as you know, the HECC is in the process of developing its next strategic plan. We are in the midst of what we call our Get Clear phase, where we are conducting focus groups, interviews. We also have a survey that's been available that hopefully you've participated in. And we will use this as well as background document research to pull together themes for consideration in this next strategic plan. So we will build on what we learned from the survey with what we hear from you all in this focus group today. We do sometimes use quotes in the focus groups, or excuse me, in our insight reports. While this meeting is recorded, the quotes that are in our report are anonymous. We do not include any attributing information. So we do just encourage everyone to be candid and to share your perspective today. And to that end, there are 3 agreements that we always ask folks to commit to in our focus groups. And I just popped those into the chat. And the first is to step up and step back. So we've got a reasonable sized group here today, but we really want to make sure that we have a chance to hear from everyone. So we encourage you to share and participate. And we also encourage you to step back and make space for others to participate. We will welcome you all to use the chat if you'd like to contribute in that way. We won't be able to necessarily hear from every person verbally on every question. So do feel free to balance your verbal participation with chiming in the chat as well. I'm actually going to ask folks to do introductions in the chat. And that is just because we have found that we have so much to discuss here and so much great input from focus group participants that we've run out of time in a past couple sessions. So I'm going to invite, instead of going around and doing introductions, for folks to just share in the chat your name, your pronouns that you prefer, your role if affiliated with an organization, and then tell us a little bit about your relationship to the HECC. So I'll give everyone just a second to do that. And we know, President Ryan, that you cannot use the chat. So if you can safely come off mute and introduce yourself, we welcome you to do that. And if not, no worries. And if there are others that can't use the chat, who are invited members of our focus group today, feel free to come off mute and introduce yourself that way. Great. Thanks, President Bailey, for getting us going. Full-time HECC collaborator, appreciate that. Great, and welcome. Thank you, Commissioner Schuler. Oh, great. Okay. So new relationship, President Ryan. Great. Great. Thank you, everyone. We've got a good mix of folks, different types of organizations and roles. Great. I just realized that to that end, I didn't go through all of our agreements. I went through the first agreement and I asked you all to step up, step back. But knowing that we've got this mix of organizations and perspectives in the room reminded me of our other 2 agreements. So I'm going to circle back to those. So our second agreement that we asked for in our focus groups is to allow for different perspectives. So we are not looking to get to consensus today. We wouldn't expect to. So we really invite you to differentiate from one another and share different perspectives and to bring that into the conversation. That's part of the value of these focus groups. And then to be bold is the third agreement. So we're going to be asking you questions today, big questions about the future of higher education in our state. So we want you to think boldly, and we invite that kind of thinking into the conversation today. So thanks everyone for getting your introductions into the chat. Again, great to see the range of organizations and perspectives we have represented today. And just in terms of a quick introduction, I mentioned I'm Sarah with Coraggio Group. I'm a principal consultant with the firm. I lead our community prosperity practice, which focuses on post-secondary education, workforce development, and economic development across Oregon. I'm based in Central Oregon. And I have my colleague, Colleen Floyd, here with me today, and she'll be taking notes as we go. She'll also be grabbing things from the chat to include in our notes. So again, please do feel free to use the chat. And if folks could, everyone's doing this so far, but just keep muted if you're not speaking, that is helpful. We can use the raise hand function when you'd like to contribute verbally. You can do that in the raised hand button, or you can just raise your hand visually. And knowing that we will have some folks who are maybe driving, who will just need to pop in, and we welcome you to just chime in when you're able. Please don't worry about interrupting. We'll make sure everyone gets included. Any questions or anything else before we get started? All right. So we're going to start pretty big picture. And so I will put our first question into the chat. From your perspective, what impact should the HECC have on Oregon? What comes to mind for folks? And again, feel free to come off mute and contribute verbally, or you're welcome to use the chat. Yeah, Commissioner Schuler.
It's Trustee Schuler, but I'm not a commissioner of anything. Yes. I'm not a commissioner. I'll just start the conversation off with the idea that, first of all, I was around on the State Board of Higher Ed when it was dissolved and the HECC was formed and the Chancellor's Office was dissolved. And at that time, the HECC was imagined, at least by the State Board of Higher Ed members, as an organization that was going to have a primary function of allocating resources, both operating and capital, and establishing policy in different areas. But I think obviously things have evolved, and now, as we sit here today, I really believe that one role for HECC that would be important from my perspective is that of this communicator to the population of Oregon about the value of higher education, what it means, how does it align with our workforce needs? Are we educating to that, or just a lot of that oversight in that strategic sense about where the state's going with higher ed. And I say that because I have great trust in what. Again, I'm not a paid administrator of a university, but I am very familiar, having been on the State Board of Higher Ed and as a trustee at Oregon State University, of the talent that exists on our campuses to run and administer, and both in the faculty and administration, these institutions. So it's that kind of division of work, if you will, where I think those institutions, and into the community colleges too, where those institutions are equipped to do the things they need to do. And HECC, I always imagine having this big umbrella approach, and one of those being this communicator of the value of higher ed and alignment of higher ed to the workforce needs, evolving workforce needs.
Great. Thank you for that. Appreciate that, and see some folks chiming in the chat as well. What else would folks add in terms of the impact you would like HECC to have on our state? Yeah, Edward.
I think if HECC is successful, we should see outcomes that are a little bit better than we would see otherwise. That would obviously be difficult to measure, but I think if HECC is really coordinating effectively, hopefully we have improved retention and graduation rates in our community college and higher and university programs. All of the mission elements really of the university and colleges would be presumably elevated through that coordinating activity, creating some additional value. Since we have 24 independent institutions, the ideal scenario to me is that the HECC helps us work better together so that we deliver higher impact on student outcomes, as well as other mission elements for the research universities, research outcomes for the universities who are engaging deeply in their regions, engagement, extension, those kinds of things as well, I think would be elevated by the HECC's work.
Okay, thank you for that. And I see some thoughts in the chat. Is there anything else others would like to add that hasn't been shared yet related to the impact you'd like HECC to have on the state? Okay. We'll move on to our next question then. So this is will be a 3-year strategic plan. So that's explains kind of the timeline parameters here. What do you believe are the most significant challenges for higher education in Oregon over these next 3 years? Great, yeah, Commissioner Sapelli.
Hi everyone. So I'm still a grad student, and then I think this question is interesting because I'm not from Oregon. I actually am from one of the U.S. territories, but moving here, Oregon's now my second home, and I got to know all these different community and these different student communities. And then the one thing that I've seen is that each year it's drastically changed in terms of like what the students need, what they want, and then as the years go on, I'm just meeting more and more students who don't want to go to college. Instead, they just want to go straight into the workforce. And then maybe 1 year something happens, and then all of a sudden they're interested in going to college. And I guess it just varies. And so I'm curious to see how the HECC is going to be flexible in terms of catering to what the student population needs, because I know it's easier for us to serve the future student community because we can set up everything now, but for the current ones that we're serving, it's always been interesting for me to see how folks help these different students, with everything that's going on in the world, both on the state and the federal level. But I guess at the end of the day, I'm just curious to see how flexible we'll be in serving the different needs of our student community and how they'll change the way we think of how we serve these communities. And again, I'm so sorry my camera's off. I'm in a space where I can't really show myself, but I'm glad to be here.
Great, thank you. President Bailey.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Can you hear me okay? And please call me Rick if you don't mind. So let me be very clear, not just because this is being recorded, I am not blaming the HECC for this. So I think the HECC and higher ed institutions share this challenge together. So let me be very clear on that. I think that over the next 3 years, I think we are at I think that we're at a really interesting point. And it started back in 1990. Oregon had a ballot measure that basically changed some of the tax structures for the state. And at the time, higher ed leaders were talking about the impact that it would have on higher education in the state. In some ways, this is a springboard off of Chair Schuler's answer to your first question. Over the last 34 years, what has happened is there has been, on average, really, a flat or sometimes even a disinvestment in public higher education in the state. The thing that has covered the gap are student tuition and fees. So 20 years ago, for example, 2/3 of our revenues as institutions came from the state and 1/3 were on the backs of students. 20 years later, it's flipped completely. Now at varying degrees. But now a majority of our revenues are on the backs of students, and that's not sustainable. So the reason why the next 3 years are critical for the HEC is that I think now we are at a place where if that trend continues, we are very quickly going to become outshadowed by all of the other regional states in the public higher education offerings that they have. There's still some beautiful things we have about Oregon, but students are also making decisions based on their bank accounts. And we know we provide a high quality education, but if we can't make it continue to keep it affordable and accessible, then I think the ripple effect for Oregon will last 100 years. So I do think that we really have to come together as a state, and I think HEC and the universities and our community college partners all need to sound the same alarm to say, who do we want to be as a state over the next 20 to 30 years? And of course, completely biased, but the engines for that prosperity are our public higher education institutions. And so that it needs to be seen as an investment in the future for all Oregonians.
Thank you, Rick. Again, see some things that have come in through the chat. Thanks for that, everyone. Anything else others would want to add to the conversation in terms of what you see as the most significant challenges over these coming 3 years? Okay. I will put our next question in the chat then. This question, what are the top 3? You don't have to list 3 if you don't want to. Collectively, I'm sure we'll get to 3. But what are the top things that the HEC can do to increase educational attainment for learners in Oregon? What do you see as the key levers that HEC can use to impact those outcomes? Kirk?
I'll start with just the obviously a topic that HEC is deeply involved in now, which is improving the transferability between junior college and university level degrees. And it's clear, everybody knows that's, if we're talking about attainment, this broadens that funnel. It brings more people into the system, and as long as that transition can be smooth, at least. It's never going to be perfect, I suspect, given the nature of the business. But to me, HEC's role in that is really one of convener, arbitrator, assist the process, bring these institutions that fall under HEC together to solve problems, as opposed to being the solution itself. These institutions, again, all can work hard together and find solutions. The HEC may have to help filter those solutions and evaluate the effectiveness and financial impact and things like that. But I just think that we all know that that is a pathway that allows more students to attain either degrees through their junior college, their community college, or on into the university level.
Thank you. Edward?
I would second that, and then I would add that I think the HEC can be a powerful voice on the funding and affordability question. So to reinforce President Bailey's comments along those lines, that we have many programs across our institutions that are focused around student success, retention, and graduation. But the reality is that the need gap is so wide for many students that those programs can only work at the margins. And this is a significant challenge. At Oregon State alone, we have a $38 million annual need gap for students who need financial aid that we simply can't meet. So what these students are doing is they're working 2 or 3 jobs and going to school part-time and often extending their education over multiple years. So I know it's the case that in every state you go into, they'll talk about the financial needs and the needs for more funding and those kinds of things. But Oregon is in a position that if it really wants to seriously improve retention and graduation rates, it has to address this need gap. Both the combination of the Oregon Opportunity Grant level, which is below comparable states for comparable programs, with the per head student funding that institutions are receiving, and in many ways the level of funding that's going to community colleges that makes it difficult for them to offer support programming. All those things combined make it very difficult for students to be successful in this state. And the HECC has to be a powerful voice for addressing that.
Thank you. Again, see some folks chiming in the chat. Anything else that anyone wants to add about what the HECC can do to increase educational attainment for learners? Okay. Thank you, President Ryan. I see some other folks chiming in the chat, and that's great. We'll let those keep coming in. I am going to put our next question in the chat as well. What do you see as the Commission's role in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I'll just make a quick comment. In thinking about this question, I know how much Oregon State University invests in DEI and the work of equality on our campus and support. And I'm sure other institutions are doing a lot of that work also. They're spending a fair amount of resources toward those things. So it's an interesting question because right now I think of it as the work that's getting done in that field, a lot of it's happening at that level, right? At boots on the ground with the students. And so the question, I didn't have a good answer. My problem is because I don't know what HECC's role would be, but I would hope that it defers or supports what's going on in the university or junior or community college level and what they're doing. And again, they could even act as the convener and bring ideas together. As Provost Fazer noted, 20 some odd institutions, all of them out there learning what works and what doesn't work and what's effective, not always getting the opportunity to share best practice and what's working. So again, maybe it's that convener of those institutions that are doing all this work on the ground.
Thank you. Would others add in terms of HECC's role to promote DEI? Yeah, right.
Yeah, just to add to it, I would say there's an external and an internal facing piece of this that the HECC can help institutions with. One is a recognition that there is a hyper politicization going on nationwide in this area, and it's unfortunate that I think it is being used as a political football. So I think they can help us push back on that trend, and that diversity and equity and inclusion are not four-letter words, and that it actually should be the fabric, woven into the fabric of every single public higher ed institution. Sorry, I'm sounding like I'm on a soapbox here. So help us promote that message. I will tell you that they're in positions that we are hiring at our institutions. there are a lot of faculty and staff who are fleeing states that have planted a separate flag in the ground, and I think that's a good thing for us, right? I think we should be that beacon, because I'm confident that we're on the right side of that argument. So helping us to tell that story, and to define who we are as a state. The other thing is, it's one thing for us as academic leaders to say, hey, here's the importance of who we are as an institution, and that is important. But it's also about what are the actions that we're taking, and how effective are they at really cultivating an environment where every student, faculty, staff member, community member knows that they belong here, that there's a gap there, right? And so I do think the HECC and this is kind of similar to what Chair Schuler said, but it's about sharing best practices, and looking at how we can demonstrate that we're actually doing this work well. And I'll finish with a wise person once said that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that is counted counts. So we need to be careful about not creating a self-licking ice cream cone here. We really need to look at, are there meaningful measures that we can look at to know that we are moving the needle in the right direction in these areas.
Thank you. Anything that anyone would like to add? Okay. I'll put our next question in the chat. It's longer if you want to read along. So the recent Oregon Values and Beliefs Survey indicated that 72% of Oregonians lean towards a feeling that a technical trade education is often a better pathway to success than a university education, while 28% feel that a university education is the best pathway to success. So we are curious, I missed the second part here. What you think the reasoning behind this opinion is? Yeah, Heather.
Hi all, I'm driving and I apologize. I have worse service than I thought I would, so hopefully I don't cut out. It's going to be interesting because I run a workforce board and part of the Oregon Workforce Partnership that I'm going to supply this answer, I think. But I think there's a few reasons why it's such a stark difference. That it mostly is the expense of higher education, and trades seem more accessible and the wages are more direct often. You can get an electrician, you can go through a journeyman, an apprenticeship, you're earning wages the whole time, and then you end up with a really good career afterwards. So that pathway is a little bit more baked. But I will say, with the emergence of these technologies and the future of work and AI and remote work and a lot of the things that we're seeing, I really think there's going to be a resurgence of liberal arts education, especially tech-enabled liberal arts. I do these futurist talks all over, and it really is how does the human work in a world where these technologies are embedded in our day-to-day? And it's only been a year, and I think they're well on their way. So, I think doubling down on humanity and how do you think critically and ask critical questions, and what does that more modern way of working look like in the next 5 or 10 years even? And that will be rapid, I'd say, even the next 5 years. So I just would encourage to look into the future a bit. Don't necessarily go off of what it is today, but what's coming, and try and get ahead of it and make your investments accordingly. Take some risks and chances on what's coming. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather. We could hear you just fine. Kurt.
Following up on Heather's comments, which I agree with, and I'm going back to my first comments on about the HEC's role, this idea that where the market is for employment might be different than what people perceive or understand what's needed to achieve those positions and those opportunities. And so I guess I go back to if there's the risk is that there's a communication or understanding gap between what's attainable and Heather's comment about the price being one of the obstacles that may divert people away from higher education is real. That's absolutely true. But yet, that's may not be the best reason to avoid higher education if truly well-paying jobs, not just for the individual, but for our society, that there's people making important decisions with knowledge and technology and behind them. We have that gap that we may have to, somebody has to address, which is where are the jobs, where are the opportunities, and how do you get to those? Because the perception of the public, there may be a disconnect, is I guess my point. I just want to make that. Thanks.
Thank you. Rick.
Yeah, just really quick. I think there's a third. I think there's a third potential reason here, and I'm spitballing. This is the be bold, so I could be way off here. I think, and I said I was in a panel yesterday with Congresswoman Bonamici up in Portland, and mentioned this same thing. I think that in some ways this is the result of a hangover in the state of Oregon. I'm an amateur, very amateur Oregon historian. I moved here two and a half years ago from New Mexico, and in a way, both states have very similar economies, where for 100 years it was based on one primary industry, right, separate for these two states. But the hangover from that, and by the way, in both of those industries, a high school diploma was sufficient for a very successful, high-paying job, right? Well, states that have moved past that, and by the way, every state needs to move past that, you have to diversify the economy. And so one of the things that Oregon should be thinking about is, as it diversifies its economy, there is a really important role for I think this gets to Ed's comment from the chat. There's a really important role for the technical trades, for sure. There should also be roles for idea generators and entrepreneurs and scientists and educators and business leaders and government leaders, like all of that. And that's all about critical thinking and leading teams. And so there's, both of these have to happen at the same time in order for the state to really flourish long term. So to me, it's a mindset shift that has to happen here in Oregon, really for us to achieve our full potential moving forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Sapelli.
I just wanted to mention, like, two things popped in my head. I think, and this is something that I'm hesitant to share, but I'm going to share it anyways. Talking to a lot of the youth, a lot of them have, because I worked with a couple of projects that work with different youth that at least it's near like the Portland metro area. The interesting comment that I've gotten from a lot of them is that they said that the value of a bachelor's degree is no longer the same as it was 10 years ago. For example, I had a lot of friends who graduated with an X degree, but because there's an oversaturation of that specific degree in Oregon, they have to move elsewhere, but they can't move elsewhere because they have family here. A lot of them are they're first generational college students, or they're from a multi-generational household. And so they would rather choose the degree path that gets them the most money, but quicker, which is a trade school rather than a traditional university setting. And then to me, it was upsetting because I actually worked with a couple of folks and we looked into the different job markets, and then a lot of these jobs that require a bachelor's degree, they pay only $1 to $2 above minimum wage, versus someone who can work at McDonald's can get paid $23, and it's the same thing as some of the jobs that I see are being offered for master's students. And I think that's one thing where a lot of the students are more educated, because I do see ads on TikTok, on social media, that shows them comparisons of why they should pursue a trade school compared to going to college, because they can get money faster. Granted, a lot of them do say that they're going to return to school, but because of like financial responsibilities or they end up getting married or they end up getting kids. That's what kind of stops them. And then that's the one thing that popped in my head. And the second thing is like school's too expensive, you know. Let me tell you, when I was in undergrad, I had to work 3 jobs, and then it was not the easiest thing to do. And what's so sad to me is that I was a non-trip. I mean, I was a out-of-state student, but my friends who lived here who paid in-state tuition, they had to work just as hard, which shows how expensive school is. And then I think having all these younger people talk to their older cousins who went to school, but the cousins discouraging them from going to college because it's worth it, but in a sense, it's not worth it if you want to get fast money. And then trade school are the only jobs that I've seen on the market where they pay significantly higher, but they're also in demand. Where once when you finish the trade school, you automatically have a job versus if you graduate with like a communications, a marketing, public health, or biology degree, you kind of have to go search around to see who's hiring, but then you can't, it's not really at a competitive rate. But those are just like my simple thoughts.
Thank you so much. Anything else on this question? All right. I'm going to put our next question into the chat. Rick and Commissioner Sapelli, if you're able to lower your hands, thank you. What policy and advocacy issues do you think the HEC should prioritize? I see some folks working away in the chat, but feel free to come off mute if anybody wants to chime in verbally as well. Again, on policy or advocacy issues you'd like to see the HEC prioritize. Yeah, Rick.
Yeah, I wanted to be thoughtful and wait. I'll say this just to save me from typing. This is this might not make the headlines, but I think it's super important and should be on the HEC's radar. Matter of fact, I mentioned this in front of the HEC commission when I had the pleasure to speak to them. There's been a pretty remarkable increase over the last 10 years in terms of reporting requirements for state and federal reporting, just things that institutions need to do. And HEC oftentimes is kind of the way station for that. And sometimes it's generated from legislative things or whatever. And the HEC manages that. I think all of us, all of our institutions are experiencing a lot of really heavy workload issues with our staff and faculty. And so I do think that the HEC can be of great service to institutions by helping to find efficiencies in that and ways in which, if they can identify redundancies, streamline some of these reporting to make it easier from a burden standpoint on faculty and staff, I think that would go a long way to be of great service to our institutions.
Thank you. Edward.
I would add to that, it'd be something the HEC should be aware of. An effect of this heavy pressure on the resources and the staff of the institutions is a very limited capacity to execute on some of our educational goals around things like smoothing transfer pathways. That work to do it is important. So we have underway in the state an effort to implement common course numbering. We've developed major transfer maps. all of that work requires a lot of effort on the part of faculty, but these are institutions that are already thinly funded, and staff and faculty are stretched, as Rick mentioned, quite thin. And as a result, these statewide objectives, which we all share in would benefit from, are slower to implement. And kind of a mindfulness about, we talk about unfunded mandates. It is effectively that. I think we want to realize that sometimes the investment up front to get that work done more quickly versus stretching it out over a long period because people are layering it onto everything else they're doing, that's going to generate faster impact, better impact for the state in the long run. I think some additional advocacy for the HECC from the HECC in with the legislature in terms of what it takes to do that kind of work and do it well and quickly would be valuable, and I think generate some pretty important student outcomes.
Thank you. I am going to, unless anyone has anything else to add there, put question 7 in the chat. So thinking about where you think and things that we've been discussing here in terms of the HECC, where the HECC should be focused, what are some trade-offs that you believe we will need to consider in the strategic planning process? And really, we're asking this because I'm sure all of you can relate with your organizations. Your stakeholders, there's more that folks want you to do. And we have to be able to make some trade-offs in order to focus our energy in different places. So is there another way to think of this? Is there anything that you think the HECC could do less of or stop doing to support some of these other areas of focus? Yeah, Kurt.
I don't have any specifics because I'm not at the level of where Ed and Rick work in this world, and I think there's some other leaders here of the universities. But I will tell you this, that the HECC replaced the State Board of Higher Education and the Chancellor's Office. And from what I understand, the HECC now it obviously covers more with the community colleges than what the Chancellor's Office covered. But the proportional growth of the HECC seems pretty amazing to me when I think about the Chancellor's Office in my day. When I started in, I forget the year wrong, probably 2007. And with the State Board of Higher Ed, I think there was probably 40 or 50 people in that office that was maybe a high number. And so I don't know the details and I don't have any suggestions, but I really think if the HECC prioritized, where it was getting its work done and what was most important, there may be ways for streamlining itself that just in general makes sense. That's the way I would think about it. It's just, I believe HECC is somewhere north of 150 employees or something like that. So it's really 3-4 times larger than the Chancellor's Office ever was. And again, Chancellor's Office didn't oversee community colleges, but that's just sort of one take without much detail, just image and perception from my side.
Thank you. Other thoughts on potential trade-offs? Ways the HECC can focus more on some of the areas you all have mentioned. Right. I'm going to put question 8 into the chat. Yep, go ahead.
Sarah,
yeah,
I'll just throw one thing in there. And I don't have a good sense of this, and I've actually been working with the HECC in the workforce Future Ready Oregon effort, and they've got some really terrific folks working on those issues. But it isn't clear to me how those different mission elements all fit together and whether there's some choices to be made in terms of mission of the HEC as it tries to navigate its role with the community colleges and the universities, and then in the workforce development space. And I'm sure that was, something that state leaders thought about, but that may account for some of the growth of the HEC, whether that's ultimately beneficial for staying focused around some really key objectives in higher education. I think some states have those in separate sorts of units. I don't know whether that's positive or negative, but it might be something, one angle here to look into as part of this planning effort. It's how those mesh together and ensure that they stay focused.
Thank you. I'll add our next question into the chat. So one of the HEC's strategic areas of focus is to streamline learner pathways. What are your thoughts on the ways the HEC can impact this? I know we've talked about this a bit, so just anything that you'd add in terms of specifically what can the HEC do to impact streamlined learner pathways? Okay, those look like some things are coming in the chat, but like I said, I know we've talked about this a decent amount, so you may not have anything else to add, which is just fine. I will get our last question into the chat, but if there are thoughts that folks have on question 8, do feel free to keep those coming. So another area of focus is expanding opportunity through outreach. Where do you think the HEC should focus its efforts in this area? Yeah, Edward.
I'm not sure what's actually envisioned here, but I'll speculate. I don't know that it would be very effective for the HEC to have a very direct role in outreach. So for example, getting out into communities to talk about higher education, the value of going to community college or value of going to university, or getting directly into the high schools. I don't see for lack of a better word, the brand of the HEC being something that's easily translated there. And I think the universities and the community colleges and other entities are better placed to do that kind of outreach. I think where the HEC might be helpful is in coordinating between K-12 community colleges and universities in terms of messaging, message platforms, alignment of messaging, helping students think about the different pathways, whether it's into trade schools, community colleges, or direct to university or transfer, whatever those pathways are. I think it'd be powerful to have more unified messaging, communication. I don't think the HEC should be actually the entity delivering that. I think it'd be the less compelling direct source, but I think it could potentially help on the coordination front.
Yeah, Kurt.
Ed was right along where I was going to go. I think the institutions that are delivering the education to really have a stronger presence and recognition, brand recognition. That was a good way to put it. So I'm not sure that's right element, and I appreciated what Ed came up with between the K-12 system and the higher ed. That coordination is an opportunity potentially. Thanks.
Anything else? Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I'm actually in a good reception area, so I thought I'd let you hear my voice instead of just typing. So I just thought I'd share. I echo the comments of the two other individuals who spoke. One of the things I will share, though, is just kind of like a positive. I will say, at least in my last 8 months here, I have appreciated the role that Ben has played as sort of intermediary with the legislature, representing us on some issues that affect all of the higher ed institutions. So just wanted to share I have appreciated that work. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So I want to commend you because we actually got through all of our official questions, which means we do have a few minutes remaining. I always like to ask you all, is there something you were hoping we would ask, you were expecting to ask, to be able to discuss that we didn't get to? Just what else that we haven't yet talked about today do you think is important for us to know to inform the HECC's next strategic plan? Yeah, Kirk.
I think it's an obvious one in my book, which is just the role of the HECC in the legislature around funding. I think there was lots of different points made, but really that's, I think, where their leverage lies, right? Is there at the governmental level. Institutions have a good story to tell, but hopefully the HECC, they as an organization seems to be in the right position to truly have some legislative leverage and have those hard discussions. We all of us go to the to the legislature with our asks, but we're we all fear that we're seen as self-serving to some degree, give me more money. But the HECC should be able to make that argument in a totality where this is why we should be funding higher ed at higher levels. These are the things we can accomplish. These are the benefits to our state. Taking that perspective, I think, is a good place for them to be in.
Thank you. And invite others to, like Kirk did, just, if there's anything else you want to kind of reiterate or make sure that we're focusing on in what we heard. Edward. You're muted, Ed.
I think we need to pay a little bit more attention to the need to keep our top graduates in Oregon. This is something other states have done very aggressively. And I think in my observation, have been in higher education systems in a couple of other states. We've been, I think, a little bit dependent or reliant on our ability to recruit folks at very advanced degree level. So masters, PhDs, scientists, engineers, others moving into Oregon, often maybe being a little less thoughtful about ways in which we can ensure that students coming out of our high schools are not going on to UC Berkeley, not going on to UW, not going to Stanford. To the degree we can retain them in Oregon, they're going to stay in Oregon, contribute to Oregon. That's something that other states have done pretty aggressively. And that I haven't seen as much focus on that in Oregon. And it worries me a little bit that sometimes we seem to be leaning toward pathways that are communicating to our students that they may not want to be aiming as high as they could. And I think that's, in some sense, it's hard for me to articulate this, but in some sense, it's selling Oregon a little short. It's selling higher education a little short for Oregonians. And I think we could, I think there'd be value in thinking about the full student spectrum and the need to retain all, as many of our graduates in Oregon as we can.
Thanks for that. Anything else that folks would like to reiterate or share before we close? All right. Thank you all so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Great insights and input today. So thank you for making space in your schedules. Guthrie has also put the link to our survey into the chat. We know we took a lot of your time today, and we would also value your participation in the survey. If you have not yet completed it, it helps to have that more quantitative feedback to balance out what we heard today. So please would invite you all to contribute if you have not yet done so. It's open until the 20th, so through tomorrow, if you'd like to participate. Thank you, everyone, so much for your time. Thank you for the work you all do. Appreciate it.